Welcome back to the Act 2 podcast, a podcast for the real-life working screenwriter. I'm Tasha Hugh.
And I am Josh Hallman.
And as a reminder, Act 2 is a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter, of which this podcast is just one of the things we do. Thank you for joining us here. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast. That way you don't miss out on any topics that are coming up. We have an interview with Joe Russo coming up, for example, and you'd be notified as soon as that comes up if you subscribe. You can also DM us if you have questions or topic suggestions, which has become the topic of our episode today, are people who have emailed in topic suggestions or questions that they had. So you could do that at ActTwoWriters@gmail.com, all spelled out, or on our Instagram and Twitter at ActTwoWriters. I am Story Thursday on Instagram and Tasha 3.0 on Twitter.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter. Josh Hallman on Instagram. Tasha.
Josh.
I'm excited.
I'm tired, Josh.
How come?
So last night we had an Act 2 mixer, and I didn't end up going to bed till like much later than Tasha would prefer, which is not that late for most people.
Sure. Can I ask what time that is?
Like 11:30.
Oh, okay. No, that's not. That's totally fine. That's there.
What time did you go to bed? Because you're a early.
I am an
sleeper.
early. I try to. I was also around 11:30. I watched The Bear when I got home.
What? The Bear?
I don't know why. I just laid down. I needed to decompress.
I needed to decompress also. I watched Zootopia.
That is a good decompression show or movie. That is perfect.
Yeah, The Bear is not a decompression.
No.
It's so stressful.
Well, it's funny you say that because we probably both felt the same way. It was like I got home and I was just like, I'm gonna just fire up something.
Socializing is hard, and it makes me happy that it's even hard for you, or like hard on the body and the mental for you, because I always picture you as someone who's just so good at it that it doesn't even faze you. Like you just don't even realize you're doing it. But this is a misconception that I've had of you for 15 years.
No, I went to the mixer. We talked to everyone, and then I walked home and I cried a little bit, and then I just curled into a ball and let it all out.
I'm so glad we're the same. We just present differently. Yep. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, we Act 2 is a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. That's how this all started, was writers in the Act 2 of their careers who have reps. They're actively going out on generals and getting jobs. Some have movies produced, some are showrunners, etc. But some have day jobs, but they're still doing the grind, trying to make their rent by being a working screenwriter. They are in Act 2 kind of proper, is what we've sort of unofficially call it. And we had a mixer with all of them last night. And I just want to apologize, Josh, because I sold you out to your wife about something we talked about on the podcast, and I feel really bad about it. It's definitely my MO. You can never trust me, I guess. And I don't mean to be untrustworthy. I was just trying to tell a joke. And then she was like, "Excuse me, you talked about that on the podcast?" And then I knew I was in it.
Yeah. Well, shouldn't have happened, I guess. I wouldn't have had to talk about it on the podcast.
That's true. It's all really her fault. She's just trying to blame
I know
shift.
Yeah. I don't know. There's nothing more to say about it.
All right. Can I go into this week in writing?
Let's go.
Empowering. Okay. This week in writing.
This week in writing.
I finally watched Beverly Hills Cop Axel F.
Yes.
And I would like you now to tell me what you really thought of it, because I feel like you weren't talking about it before because I hadn't seen it.
Okay. This was actually also one of my this week's in writing. I know that people did not love this movie. I've heard some things I just read reviews and stuff like that, and I've even talked to people who couldn't even finish the movie. But I went in, I know, which I thought was just insane, because you have to keep in mind, I went in open-minded, didn't know what I was going to get. It's been a long time since I've seen a Beverly Hills Cop movie. I love Eddie Murphy, and I just fired up the movie, and I was like, all right, let's just see where this goes. And then by like 30 minutes, I was like, you know what? I'm like still like really into this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was in. I was just kind of along for the ride, and I happened to really enjoy it. I thought it was funny, and I like you take it for what it is, and I did do that, and I really loved the movie. I really like the movie.
Yeah, like the movie. That's accurate too. I didn't love it, but I liked it. I enjoyed it. But I
Yeah.
was also like, I think I know where people decided to turn the movie off, because there are moments where I kind of like half glanced at Paul to see if he was invested, because if he wasn't, I was gonna be like, well, we
Mhm.
could just spend our time watching something else if you want, because there were, especially when you start off, like the daughter character, I was a little unsure of. Some of the writing around them was a little on the nose, or a little like I've heard it before. However, all of the stuff with Axel was so fun.
Yeah.
Like he embodies that character so much. So like as soon as he gives his Axel Foley smile,
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, and the music kicks in. I'm like, yes, this is such a fun attitude, and I've missed it for so long.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that I missed the Axel Foley character this much, but him getting into all the shenanigans and just like classic Axel Foley of like, I got this. And then he completely lies in order to get into places, or charms people. No matter what, he's going to get into wherever he is. And just all of that like shenanigans was just so fun.
Yeah. It's a fun movie.
Yeah.
And it's an action comedy.
Yeah. Apparently one of the, original.
One of the originals. We're going to do a deep dive into action comedies. But no,
Definitely.
I liked
What
it.
did you think of the plot? Like the mystery he was investigating?
So what I actually liked about the movie, and I'm sorry I'm going to get into spoilers, is that they didn't do some big like bad guy reveal with Kevin Bacon. Like you kind of knew he was a bad guy right away.
Yeah, that was a really interesting choice.
And I thought, yeah, because there's the bad version of that would have been like, oh, let's tease this out until the very end and have Kevin Bacon seem like the good guy, and then all of a sudden he's bad. But I think we're clever enough to, as an audience, be like, okay, yeah, that's clearly the guy. Like he's just too polished when we meet him. But the plot, I didn't think it was like too complicated. It was just kind of cut and dry. It's one of those things where you're watching the movie for Axel Foley, and
Yeah.
you're kind of invested in that, which is a really interesting thing. Like you're invested in him. I like Joseph Gordon-Levitt in the movie, and the
Yeah, he
daughter,
did
everyone.
great.
I was just in.
He's like a perfect sort of heir to the movie, as like that just sort of
Yeah.
tightly buttoned cop character.
This is going off of like character stuff, but I also just like movies set in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's so cool.
Regarding the plot, I was a little annoyed by it because it did feel overly simple.
Mm-hmm.
And then, how do I say, like complicated, but in a fake way.
With the cartel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still don't, to this day, don't understand what the plot really was. Like, I know Kevin Bacon was a bad guy. I know he wanted more than whatever his police salary was. And he was not afraid to show that. I know that he was smuggling cocaine through statues. I have no idea how the cartel is involved. I have no
Right.
idea how the cop who kind of is the inciting incident to the whole thing, who is killed in the beginning, how he's related to this story at all. And then there are moments where, like, I don't know if you remember in the impound yard,
Mhm.
and he's there with his daughter, and they find, like, there should be a camera here, but the camera's gone. Where's the camera from the car? We have to go find it. And then the daughter like puts pieces together, and he's like, see, like, you're just like me. And I was like, well, it doesn't mean she's smart. We're all putting it together. Like, it's not very hard.
Yeah.
So there are moments like that I felt that I was like, I kind of felt sad that it wasn't a little smarter there, or a little harder to put together, so that they did feel smarter than me. And then, yeah, just some confusion with the cartel and all of that. I would just wish was smoothed out. But as you say, like, I agree. I was still in it because Axel Foley is fun to watch uncover things, and I didn't really care what he was uncovering.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy how a good character can just make or break everything?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really basic, but it just, if you have someone that's so engaging and someone that's so much fun, and he really does like embody Axel Foley.
Yeah.
You're
It's so
just
great.
like, I just love Eddie Murphy. Just
I know.
love him.
Me too. Me too. All right. I saw the F1 trailer starring Brad Pitt,
Yeah.
which is like his Formula One racing Have you seen the trailer that it's him? He opens with basically saying, I want this car and I don't need it to be safe. I just need it to be fast, which is like it's a super cool opener. And then it's just a music video.
Yeah.
Of him driving to Queen. And that's it. That's the trailer. And I watched that and I was like, that is so brazen to just do, like, there's no story. It's just a music video. But I was also like, that's fucking cool. And it creates a tone and a mood and an excitement, and I'm in.
Yeah, totally. Because I think you're watching it and you're like, it's Brad Pitt. You're either in on Brad Pitt or you're not in on Brad Pitt.
Yeah, true.
It's F1. There's already a built-in audience. You're either in on F1 or you're not in.
I'm not in on F1. So it was Queen and Brad Pitt that did it for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And that probably, that sets the tone and embodies kind of the pacing and atmosphere of the movie, where it's like energetic, kind of heart-pounding racing movie.
Yeah.
With Brad Pitt.
Yeah. Someone told me they felt like it was like Top Gun, but with Brad Pitt and cars.
I'll see that 3 times in 1 week.
Every day of the week I'd see that.
I absolutely would see that. No, that sounds like a perfect comp.
Yeah.
I have one.
Go.
The Ryan Reynolds Deadpool article where he said that he had taken a pay cut in the first Deadpool so he could bring the writers onto the set and basically create this writer's room. This is a little bit of a newsy thing, but just create this writer's room type atmosphere on the set of Deadpool, which I think is just incredible and just has to be said.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I have this conversation with my lawyer every single time anything comes up where he's like, he is literally like, don't take this job. It's not worth your time. They're not paying you what you're worth. And I have to be like, well, but I love it.
Yeah.
And I sort of don't care. Like because what lawyers don't understand, and people who are, often like agents and the people who are not necessarily creative and are just trying to get you the best deal, is that this job fills us with joy. Like, this is why we exist, is to do this work. And so I don't care if they're like, I would do it for free. So, but I guess that's what the lawyer is fighting against, is our impulse to do things for free. But yeah, I always love those stories where actors who absolutely can, by the way, he's a bajillionaire, can take less money, even though his name is first on the billing. So that other people can succeed. It's very, very cool.
Just on that note, real quick, I was talking just yesterday to Leo Sardarian. I forgot his last name. He was the writer. I didn't forget. I mispronounced his last. I'm so sorry, Leo. He wrote Atlas. We were discussing writing, and we were discussing just what you were talking about, that joy and feel of the heart and sweat and tears you put into a script that you write. And a lot of people just don't understand it, Yeah. It's such a isolating thing to do, what all writers do. And I know we've gotten a little bit off topic of what we're saying, but you're absolutely right in terms of people just don't understand the amount that goes into writing and the love for it. Anyway, continue. Okay.
I have one more. Did I already tell my story about the San Francisco bookstore?
Tell it again.
So my This Week in Writing is actually that I've been reading a lot more. And if you recall from our 6-month check-in for Goal Buddies or Goals, I was not reading at all. I had not picked up a single book all year. And suddenly I've read like 3. And it's been amazing. And I'm finding that because this joy has recurred in me, I am making time for it. Whereas before I was like, I don't have time to read. How do people do this? I am just replacing like the time that you're talking about where we were decompressing by watching our movies. I've now like slotted that in. Like that's reading time, like to relax. I'm now reading. And it started because I went to San Francisco and I saw like in things to do in San Francisco, there was a genre only bookstore in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood. And I walked in and it was immediately like, these are my people. Like all the books that were showing were about like dragons and fantasy and kings and queens. And it was just so fun. And I've been looking for murder mysteries that are set in a fantasy world with magic or whatever. And so I was walking around overwhelmed, collecting books as I went because I just wanted all of them. And I was like, I have to stop doing this and just ask them, hey, do you have any recommendations on murder mysteries set in a fantasy world? And because it's a small bookstore with people who love genre, they were like, oh, absolutely. Like, what kind of murder mystery? What kind of fantasy do you want? Like, she just started asking me all of these questions. And I was like, oh, like, you know what you're talking about. And so then I started getting more specific. Now, in this industry, you often have to pay people to do this job for you because you're trying to get IP. You're trying to figure out what titles are out there that I could potentially adapt. And there are people you can pay who will go through all of the books that are out there coming out new, who are old, and put together a list for you. But this woman was just a fan of all this stuff, and this was her job. So she just rattled off 2 books, walked me over to them and gave me to them and told me kind of what the plot was and why it fit into what I wanted. And I was like, oh my God, I love you. First of all. Second of all, I'm buying all of this. And then our San Francisco trip, which was to go see the Dodgers lose to the Giants,
Nice.
became a reading trip. We just kind of sat in our hotel with the view and then were reading all day, and it was awesome.
Were you reading the same book at the same time?
No, because Paul requested books that were horror comedy, and she also knew exactly what to do for that, and he loved his book. And it was just so cool. And this is a little tiny bookstore called Borderlands. And they have this program where you can donate money to them and become you become a donor to their bookstore. And it helps them pay their employees and pay for their lights. And it's only $100 a year. And then you gain access to certain perks with the store. So I was like, we're immediately doing that. This is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So ever since then, I've been reading a lot, and I just want to say that I'm really excited about it.
Wow, I need to read again.
It's so awesome. It's so inspiring. People ask, where do you get inspiration? It's I think just reading other people's ideas. And it's not that I'm going to go steal it. It's just that it excites me to be in different worlds and to see how other characters are walking through them. And I don't know, just so fun. Your brain gets activated.
There's no denying it. All right. Main topic?
Yes. Today we are doing a mailbag episode.
That's a drum roll.
Where we are answering some questions that we've been emailed from listeners. So please keep them coming.
Mm-hmm.
The first question comes from George, who asked about dialogue. Basically, George is looking to make his dialogue stronger. He feels he's more skilled at structure and knowing what his characters need to be doing, but that his dialogue still sounds very written. So I have a lot of thoughts about this, George. I think that I don't compliment myself ever, but I do think dialogue is one of my strengths. And I think that it's because I've worked so hard on it. So it's not just something I'm naturally gifted in. I have been terrible at dialogue in my past, but I've worked really hard to make it good and realistic and believable. I think that a writer who's good at writing dialogue is not necessarily someone who's just good at writing realistic dialogue, though that's extremely important. I think a good writer of dialogue needs to know a few things. The first is how every individual character in their script would talk. Meaning, if I said, what does your hero think about global warming? And then what do they think about French fries? You should be able to tell me, not only in their voice, how they would respond, anything to save the fucking animals, they're way better than humans anyways. Maybe they say that to global warming. Maybe if you ask them about French fries, they say, it's my favorite breakfast food. Whatever your character, and every character should have a different answer to that. Every character should have a different way of responding to that, and you should know exactly how your characters would respond. And if you don't, then you need to do more digging into your characters. It becomes a character problem at that point, not a dialogue problem. You're not writing good dialogue for them because you don't know who they are and what they would say and how they would say it. And I think that applies to not just your hero character or your villain character, but also the bartender you invented who has 2 lines, or the cab driver you invented, or the boyfriend character, whatever. You should know what their voice sounds like at all times. And their voices should be different. That's kind of my number one.
Yeah, I love that. I just want to interject and say, you just said something that I think is the best thing to do is bring up obscure questions like global warming and French fries that probably don't pertain to the script, but allow you to think outside of what you're doing with your characters and be like, yeah, what do they think about? How would they respond to that? That's actually something while you said, I was like, oh yeah, I forget to do that. It's something I've done before, but that's to me something that's very helpful. And I just wanted to say that. That's all.
And it becomes weirdly key And not just in like the craft of writing your scene on a blank page, but in actually getting things made and having them tested by producers who are going to read them. Because I have often been asked, well, what would your character do in this situation, by a director or by a producer, someone who needs to actually make this thing work and function. They say, well, what would they do in this situation? And I have to know. And that is related to knowing how they would respond in their dialogue, because my knowledge of the character is so airtight that I know exactly how they'd respond to any given situation, both in dialogue and like physically or, you know, mentally, wherever. So again, I think the number one thing is character. Know them utterly and completely. And then I think the second thing you need to know as a writer of dialogue is, what is this character thinking but not saying? I think every single day of our lives, we think things that we do not say to people, or we say things that are loaded with subtext or passive aggression. And I think the main problem that I see in bad dialogue is that the dialogue is very on the nose. It says exactly what the character is thinking. Like, you know, I think we need to go to the warehouse and I'd like to drive because you're a bad driver. Instead of something more like, we have 10 minutes to get to the warehouse. Give me the keys. You're slow as fuck. Like, that's just in a tone, right? It's in a personality that's different. And I think that's a very plot driven example, but I think you see the kind of the point there. Even more, I think of how you talk to your spouse or your mom or your kids. Like, you may want to say something like, get off your fucking phone, talk to me at the dinner table, or don't talk to my child like that. But you don't. You say something else. You know, you might try to get your wife's attention by asking her questions about herself, or asking her something shocking so that she'll put her phone down at the dinner table. Or you might hold back your anger with your mom and instead say something your therapist taught you. Like, you know, like, thank you for your opinion, right? But that's not how we address that issue in this house, right? You just kind of talk around it a little bit.
I hear you.
Yeah, I hear you. But the point is that every single day we don't say what we mean. And every single day writers have their characters say exactly what they mean. So just think about how you talk yourself and how other people talk to you. And my advice would be, if this is a problem that you are finding in your own writing, is to go back through your dialogue scenes and really think to yourself, what do my two characters in this scene think? What are they afraid to say? How would they word it given they are speaking to this other character? Meaning, if one character in the scene flies off the handle very easily, would your other character in the scene have to maybe tiptoe around that and say things in a very different way? Or does your character love setting the other character off, so they're going to say something inflammatory? Again, that you have to know your character to know how they would approach that moment. So study your own scenes, and you can always, I think dialogue is the easiest thing to go back and kind of do a dialogue pass on. In fact, writers get hired all the time to come in to do a dialogue pass on someone else's script. And that's just it. That's their job. Just touch the dialogue. So you can yourself do that. I will say that sometimes changing dialogue may affect other scenes, because you sort of realize the closer you get to the real way this person would speak that, oh, this changes the information of this scene. She's actually not going to say the name of the killer here. She's too afraid. So I have to move that somewhere else. Could definitely be a consequence. But you may just need to go through, and it's a scene work situation.
Yeah.
But you can do that. It's a helpful tool to know that you have that. Okay. The last thing that I think you need to know as a writer of dialogue is that your dialogue has to move the story forward. And I really cannot emphasize this aspect of dialogue writing enough, because when a movie or an episode of TV lags, I would say look at the dialogue. Because for me, when I feel something is lagging, it's almost always because there is too much dialogue in the scene. The objective of the scene has already been accomplished, but we are still talking. Why? Like, we're done. Get out of the scene. I'm bored now. For example, I saw Longlegs recently, and they had this really cool scene in a trailer whose name I don't remember. I don't remember the movie. But the scene was, this woman walks into a bedroom with a coffee mug, and she says, "Did you get milk when you went to the store?" And then the camera reverses and you see another woman who's asleep. She's wearing an eye mask. She's clearly just woken up at the sound of this other woman knocking on her door. And she says, "Do you see fucking milk in the fucking fridge?" And the woman says, "No." So the sleeping woman says, "Then I didn't fucking get milk." And then the other woman storms off angry. Now, I think this scene is better because we get so much out of it without more dialogue. It could easily have been, "Well, why didn't you get the milk? I told you to get the milk. Why are you such a bitch?" But none of that dialogue matters because the point of the scene has already been made. We know this woman is looking for milk. We know the sleeping woman didn't get it. Not only that, but she's still sleeping when this woman is already up and dressed and ready for the day, which tells you something about this woman.
Mm-hmm.
And then the spare dialogue also already tells you that this woman who's sleeping is a bitch. You get it. It's very clear. We don't need to rehash it, right? So also use blocking in your scene because we work in a media that is visual and audio.
Sure. I love
so
it.
use those things to your advantage when you're thinking about dialogue, right? So yes, the basic point here is your dialogue should move your scene along. And I think something that I have found in show running and also in animation in particular is how much every single line actually matters. How you really have to justify every single line being in your movie. Like when you get down to having your meeting with your director, they're going to want to know why every line is in there. And if you just have shitty lines that don't move anything forward or just kind of empty air, like that's getting cut. The scenes have to be very, very trim and to the point because that just makes a better scene. And I think we as writers have a tendency to overwrite by a lot. We love to pontificate. We love hearing our characters, talk. Because we're so clever and we want everyone else to see how clever we are. And I have definitely been a victim of this narcissism. But I think the paradox is we actually sound a lot smarter and more amazing as writers when our characters speak more to the point, while of course still being in character. But yeah, good dialogue is not easy. I think a few suggestions that I have on how I improved my dialogue anyways, because again, I worked really hard on this, was reading a lot of scripts from some of the best writers. Not just any script, really good scripts. If you join our Patreon, a little plug here, we do script clubs where we read scripts, we discuss the writing of them, and this becomes extremely helpful, I think, for all of us to just hear how other writers talk. Actually, small story. When I was in high school, I had this literature/creative writing teacher whom I absolutely loved. We really took a shining to each other, I think, because I was one of the few people who was like, I love writing. Let me get more of this. And he clearly saw some raw talent or something. And I remember one time he said to me, which I clearly have never forgotten, it was traumatic at the moment, was that I needed to find my own voice. He said that we keep reading all this great literature and all my characters talk like the characters from great literature, meaning they spoke beautifully eloquent sentences like literary characters do. They didn't talk like real people and they didn't have my point of view. So he said to me, that's not what writing is. He said, read the greats, but don't copy them. So that's something to also think about when you're reading these scripts is it helps you get a sense, but please find your own voice. And then another thing you can do is just watch really great shows. And for me, you can break it down, like write down the dialogue in a particular scene that you love. Even if you have to watch it a few times, just write it down, get it down on paper, look at it, take it apart. Because if you think about it, like mechanics become mechanics because they love taking cars apart and figuring out how they tick. And writers are really no different. We just break different things apart. So watch great movies, watch great shows, break down the dialogue scenes that you admire the most, and figure out how they function. In particular, ask questions like, what are characters saying versus feeling? And how are they saying it? How are you able to glean a specific character's personality from their dialogue? What's the writer doing to give you that feeling of the character? Also, because again, this is a visual medium, what is the actor doing? Like that's some of the coolest parts of our job is figuring out what in the actual space that the character's in, what stuff in the room can they interact with that actually gives you more than maybe a line of dialogue ever could. So that's fun stuff to look at as well. And then I'll shut up after this, which is my final advice, is something that I definitely did. It sounds really weird. I know it sounds weird, but again, it's something that I did, and I feel like it blew things open for me in terms of how I understood dialogue. And that is to go out into the world, sit at a crowded cafe or a restaurant, and just listen to people. Listen to how they talk to each other. And if you can, if it's not too creepy, write it down. But if you feel like they might see you, just listen. And then you'll start to really notice how people cut each other off all the time, how they finish each other's sentences or change the direction of a conversation completely, but somehow it still makes sense. Everyone has little quirks to how they talk, little phrases they use or intonations that change. Also, listen to how a father-daughter talks versus how two female friends talk. It's very different. How? Why? Do this a lot. And at the time, I lived in Boston when I was doing this because that's where I got my MFA in screenwriting. And it felt super weird. But holy shit, did I learn a lot about how we actually talk. And this trick was something I was able to harness and kind of apply to my characters. Okay, I'm done now.
I'm not really sure where the podcast goes from here because that was spectacular.
I warned you I had a lot to say about dialogue.
You were like, I have a lot to say. And I said, we're going to let Tasha go.
I love this question. I love dialogue. It's my favorite. I think it's all of our favorite things to write, really.
Yeah.
I mean, action scenes are really fun as well. But dialogue is so great because, again, I think like we can show off how clever we are, but it's also one of the hardest things.
Yeah.
To get right.
Of course, action scenes are great, but if we're being real in like the percentage of what's more important, dialogue kind of takes the cake in terms of what's important in a script because, well, I don't even have anything else to say. I actually just want to stop the podcast because our file high. I was like, oh man, this is great.
No, we have another question.
All right. But no, that was awesome.
Thanks, Josh. I'm going to go into our second question because I don't want to short shift Dylan.
Fine.
Thank you, Dylan. This was like a Josh question to answer.
I knew you were going to say that. That's why I didn't want to do this. I feel like this is like if you're like a talent show and you're like and like there's some like professional like piano player who's like tours the country and then you get up and you play like 2 or 3 notes or something. I don't even know how to describe it. You're like, I just learned the piano 5 months ago. All right, let's go.
Take it.
Okay. Well, it's actually a two-part question. And that question is, hi, I was wondering if you could talk about what exactly high concept means. I'd also love it if you could do a deeper dive in how you approach writing for different genres, westerns, action, sci-fi, etc. I know it's kind of broad, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. To me, a high concept movie is basically where you can convey a movie and its hook and its idea in like 1 or 2 sentences. I actually looked up. I was like, what does the internet consider to be some high concept movies? Things like Limitless, great movie. Jurassic Park, The Truman Show. Is The Truman Show a high concept movie?
I guess it's easy to pitch, right? A guy grows up completely on a reality TV show that he's unaware he's in.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Liar Liar, the Jim Carrey movie, it's like, oh, a lawyer has to tell the truth for 24 hours.
Right.
Those are, and there's different levels of high concept, but the idea being the high concept is it's like date night.
Yeah.
And it's like these things where you're like, oh yeah, okay, so it's this, and these two movies meet each other, and it's just a very big idea as opposed to something that might be a little bit more lower budget of like a father and daughter kind of working through their issues in a cabin over the course of a weekend. That's more of a character piece.
Date night is the one that's sticking in my head the most.
Same.
Like you see that poster of Tina Fey and Steve Carell all beat up in their like nice date dresses and suit, and then it says date night on the title, and you're like, I know what that movie is, and I either want to see that adventure or I don't, but I know what that movie is.
Yeah.
And then it becomes just, hopefully the writer and director have like really nailed it. But yeah, that's high concept, I think, to me as well. It's so immediately easy to understand. It is what people call the elevator pitch. You could literally pitch it to you. And by the way, the reason why the elevator pitch exists is because studio executives are so busy. So sometimes they don't have time to go talk to their boss, but they may catch them in the elevator. Hey, walk with me to the elevator while I go to my lunch and then tell me what's going on with your day and what projects you're working on. And then let's just say you're a writer who has just spent a month putting together a pitch. You've just pitched to a junior studio executive. They now have time only in the elevator on the way to go to lunch for their boss to go to lunch to pitch them what you have just spent a month preparing. And if it's high concept, they can easily say, well, it's this middle-aged couple who goes on a date and it all goes wrong in a hilarious way. And okay, like the boss understands what that is. And they're like, I'm in or I'm not, So that's what high concept is easy to pitch in a sentence or two.
Just yesterday when we were talking, we were in a group and we were talking about what you and I had been working on. And you had pitched it. You did, it's this meets this, or it's this set here. And hearing it, I know we've talked about it, but then seeing it in a group, you're like, oh yeah, that's it. You understand. I mean, we've all.
It's funny. The response was immediately like, oh, okay. Yeah, I get that.
So to the email, what is a high concept? It's when you can just very quickly just say, it's Jurassic Park set here or whatever it may be. It's those ideas that people just click immediately and then you're off and running.
Yeah. It's tough.
It is very tough.
I've always said I'm not good at high concept. Josh is very good at high concept. He'll just come in with a list of ideas that just make sense. And I struggle to I don't know, because I think I maybe try too hard as well, or I don't know, I don't have a high concept brain that just immediately puts things together in a really clean way. I can't. I'm more. I don't know.
First of all, not true. But second of all, I mean, we do this all the time. I think all writers do this. You think of movies you like, and then we've done this before where we're just kind of riffing, and you're like, oh my God, it's this meets this. And then the second you say it, you're like, wait, does that make sense?
Right.
Could that be a movie? And you kind of play it out, and if it's beyond a parlor trick of a first act, and you're like, wait a minute, now I can kind of see where this movie could go, how these characters can, who are the characters, what do they do, where does it go?
Yeah. I guess that helps me because, I think the reason why I'm often not good at high concept is because I don't start from a place of concept. I start from a place of theme or character or a scene that came to my head. That's not a high concept thing. But the more you talk about it, the more like, oh my God, yes, it is Top Gun in space. That's so cool.
Yeah. Oh man. So did we just complicate high concept?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, Dylan can reply and tell us if that's true.
And then the second part of this, which I feel like might be leaning a little more into Tasha land, is can we do a deeper dive in how you approach writing for different genres?
Westerns, action, sci-fi, etc.
Yeah.
I would say my answer to how do I approach writing different genres is research. I do a lot of research. I actually go on Pinterest and I create a new folder for this project and I just go to town. And if you've never been on Pinterest, I actually learned this trick from a director who creates boards all the time on Pinterest for his projects where let's say it is a Western and I want to get ideas for what a town would look like. I go into Pinterest and just type in a specific description of a town that I'd want, and up pops a ton of art or photos or whatever that I can then start to use as basically my mood board. Pinterest has been very handy for me for the starting of writing different genres. I also watch other movies that are in that world because that puts you in the space. It shows you what other people are doing. You experience that genre and you start to live in it. And that's really the key, is to just start to live in it. I will also put together playlists, music playlists that I can play while I'm writing that work for, I was writing a sci-fi thing and I listened to a lot of the Tron soundtrack, for example.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's so good. Tron is always the go-to.
Yeah.
I will say though, and we've talked about this before, I think personally it's important to somewhat master one genre before you start trying to dive into any. If you're a writer and you're trying to get your scripts out there or your script out there and you're trying to get yourself recognized, only because of what we've talked about is just kind of having the next script, which is in the same genre and same vein of what you have originally written. Not saying that's the only way to go. That's just my personal belief.
Yeah, we talk a lot about staying consistent. And that doesn't mean, though, that you can't write a Western and then a fantasy, but if there's something similar, because those to me are both worlds that you have to create. So if there's a similarity in terms of like if your Western is a rom-com, but your fantasy is dramatic, sort of action adventure, those are very, very different.
Yeah.
So pick a lane, at least at first.
Totally.
Yes, and then I would also think about how the world you're writing in informs your action and informs your characters. Like Josh talks a lot about when we write action scenes, how to use the world around you, the setting that you're in, if it's a warehouse or a yacht or a castle, whatever you choose, like the space needs to inform what the action is. So you really do have to do some of that world building in order to just kind of see how your film is going to play out. And then in terms of character, of course, like a Native American woman who grew up in Oklahoma in 1860 is going to have a very different background, a very different point of view of the world than a white man who was born in the year 3000 in New York City. So how does your world inform who your characters are and what they believe? That's also some of the sort of initial thinking that you should be doing as you're diving into whatever genre you're in.
Yeah.
Planning. It's just planning.
Yeah, it's just the research into it. It's like a musician when they make a different album. And then
I say like I know what that is. I don't know anything
for
about
sure.
that.
Me too. Like I know all the musicians.
What do they do? I thought they just like play a thing and it sounds
It's like
good.
when
or
your
it
girl
doesn't.
Taylor Swift went from country to pop.
Ugh, worst decision she ever made.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Dylan, I hope that answered your question. That was much shorter of an answer, but I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I hope it answered too.
Okay. Quote of the day. In writing, don't use adjectives which merely tell us how you want us to feel about the thing you are describing. I mean, instead of telling us a thing was terrible, describe it so that we'll be terrified. Don't say it was delightful. Make us say delightful when we've read the description. You see, all the words horrifying, wonderful, hideous, exquisite are only like saying to our readers, please will you do my job for me? C.S. Lewis. Please remember to rate and subscribe. Follow us at ActTwoWriters for more awesome writing stuff. You can follow me, Tasha, at Story Thursday on Instagram or on Twitter at Tasha 3.0.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram.
And as always, the Act Two podcast is a production of Act Two, a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This episode was edited by Paul Lundquist.